Sheriff? You can't be serious. Around here, I hold the authority. That piercing, ragged sound, laced with pure fury, ripped through the midday heat. I spun around, and there she was. Carol Peters, my neighbor, my torment, the self-proclaimed Empress of Silver Lake. At first glance, her appearance was almost absurd. Pushing 60, sporting a vest that seemed to shrink her, and a cheap plastic badge pinned askew on her chest. But there was nothing remotely amusing about the object in her grasp. A firearm, substantial, dark, lethal, and leveled directly at my daughter, Emily. She had just emerged from the dock, barefoot, her skin still glistening from the lake, a towel draped loosely over her shoulders, dark tendrils of water tracing paths down her back. To any observer, she appeared as any carefree young woman enjoying a weekend visit, but Carol perceived no such innocence. Carol saw an adversary. Carol saw someone who had stubbornly refused to yield, to comply, to submit. And now Carol held a loaded pistol aimed squarely at her person. "Ma'am," Emily stated, her voice clear and composed, carrying across the driveway. "Please lower the weapon immediately." I felt Sarah's grip on my arm tighten, a vise-like pressure that sent a pang of pain through me. My wife's eyes were wide with terror, her lips pressed together, a desperate attempt to suppress a cry. Behind us on the porch, my grandchildren had fallen completely silent, like miniature statues caught in a moment of suspended animation. Even the incessant drone of the cicadas seemed to cease, as if the entire lake was holding its breath. Carol let out a laugh. It was no ordinary sound. It was high-pitched and fractured, like the shriek of breaking glass. "You don't issue me commands," she snarled, her voice faltering. "I am the governing body of this community. You are on restricted property, and I will detain you myself, if necessary." Her words reverberated against the backdrop of the pines. Detain. Citizens arrest. My mind raced. My sole focus remained on the small, unwavering silhouette in the sights of that firearm. My beloved daughter, my Emily. She didn't flinch, not by a millimeter. She simply raised her hands, palms outward, and spoke again, her voice now a hushed, deliberate tone. Each word was as sharp and unyielding as tempered steel. "My name is Emily Clark. I am the elected sheriff of this county. You are currently committing a felony. Disarm yourself, Sheriff." The pronouncement struck Carol with the force of a physical blow. Her head snapped back, a flicker of something, bewilderment, disbelief, crossing her eyes. But she quickly regained her composure, her lips twisting into a derisive sneer. "You? The sheriff?" Carol spat. "Don't be ridiculous. You think a swimsuit qualifies you as an officer around here?" Am the sheriff." The pistol trembled in her grasp, but her voice escalated, a shrill, defiant cry. And me, my knees, felt like they were about to buckle. This was no longer a petty dispute over neighborhood rules. This wasn't about fines or refuse bins or bylaws. This was the culmination, the final eruption of a storm that had been brewing for months. I longed to shout, to sprint, to throw myself between Emily and that weapon. But I was rooted to the porch, utterly powerless, trapped in a waking nightmare. I looked at my daughter, the same child I'd taught to ride a bicycle, the same young woman I'd proudly escorted down the aisle on her wedding day, and here she was, facing down a gun with a fortitude I could only dream of possessing. Then it hit me. Carol was completely oblivious. She had no idea that the young woman she was threatening wasn't just some visitor or simply a parent's child. She was the lawfully elected sheriff of this county, a bona fide officer with actual authority and the immediate backing of law enforcement, just a phone call away. Carol believed herself to be the law, but she was about to learn a harsh lesson. Her perceived authority evaporated the instant she pointed that gun. Standing there, my heart pounding in my chest, my wife clinging to my arm, I knew this was far more than a neighborly squabble. This was the climactic chapter of a narrative that began months prior, the day Sarah and I moved into our idyllic cabin by the lake. Back when I believed tranquility and quiet were the only treasures awaiting us, before Carol Peters decided she was royalty, before my daughter had to remind her of the actual law of the land. That is where the true story unfurls, and that is how it concludes, with the metallic click of handcuffs securing the wrist of the woman who fancied herself our ruler. When I tell you we had yearned for this place for ages, I mean it with every fiber of my being. I dedicated the majority of my professional life as a civil engineer, immersed in blueprints and demanding deadlines, often passing by advertisements for cabins that remained perpetually out of reach. Sarah and I would spend evenings at our kitchen table after exhausting days discussing our future. One day, we vowed we would have a porch perfect for sipping coffee and watching the dawn paint the sky. One day, we would have a dock where our grandchildren could frolic and shout with glee until their cheeks were flushed crimson. 20 years of shared dreams, 20 years of diligent saving. And then, by what felt like an absolute miracle, one day became our present reality. The cabin itself wasn't opulent, merely a modest two-bedroom structure nestled within a secluded inlet of Silver Lake, showing signs of age on its exterior but possessing a solid foundation and robust construction. The kind of dwelling that exuded an unpretentious charm, a sense of genuine authenticity. I vividly recall our very first morning waking up there. The air was perfumed with the scent of pine and water, sharp and invigorating. The hauntingly beautiful calls of loons echoed across the placid surface of the lake. Sarah prepared coffee using her cherished old percolator, and we sat on the porch in serene silence, our hands cradling warm mugs, observing the sunlight cascade across the water's gentle ripples. For the first time in decades, I felt a profound sense of stillness, not restlessness, not urgency, just pure serenity. Our initial neighbors proved to be quite cordial. A gentleman named Tom offered a friendly wave from his canoe as he glided past. An elderly couple thoughtfully presented us with a homemade pie during our first week. Everyone seemed content to mind their own affairs. No intrusive questions were posed. No one disturbed our peace. It was precisely what we had envisioned. I occupied myself with minor home improvement projects, reinforcing the dock, sketching designs for a fire pit, meticulously stacking cedar planks for a planter box Sarah desired. My intention wasn't to construct a mansion, but rather to engage in the satisfying activities common to men in retirement. Sarah would often remark, "Frank, this is our paradise. Don't overexert yourself." Yet the truth was, those small projects brought me immense joy and a sense of purpose. In the evenings, we would leave the windows open, listening to the chorus of frogs in the marsh and watching fireflies illuminate the water's surface with their intermittent glows. I thought to myself, this is it. We've finally arrived. For a brief period, life unfolded exactly as we had imagined. Peaceful, ordinary, and beautiful. However, peace is a delicate commodity, and occasionally its disruption isn't a dramatic event. Sometimes it begins with something minor. Our disruption commenced one Saturday morning. I was in the front yard, measuring the precise location where I intended to install Sarah's planter box. The sun had just begun to pierce through the dense pines when I detected an unusual buzzing sound. Initially, I mistook it for the distant hum of a lawnmower. Then, I realized it was the distinct sound of tires on gravel, and the noise was approaching rapidly. It was a golf cart, not an uncommon sight in lake communities. But this particular cart was peculiar. It came to an abrupt, dramatic halt at the edge of our driveway. Mounted atop the cart was a flashing yellow light, the sort one might typically see on heavy construction machinery. The sides of the cart were crudely painted in black and white, as if someone had attempted to mimic a police vehicle but had run out of both paint and creative inspiration. And then she emerged. A woman wearing dark sunglasses, a clipboard tucked beneath her arm as if it were a formidable weapon. Her posture was rigid, her chin held high, and she proceeded across our lawn with an air of absolute ownership. "Welcome to the Silver Lake Community Association," she declared, her tone not that of a neighborly greeting, but of a border guard scrutinizing passports. That was my inaugural encounter with Carol Peters. At that moment, I had no inkling of the significant role she would play in our lives. I was unaware that this self-styled queen of the golf cart, with her flashing beacon and clipboard, would transform our tranquil haven into a battleground. All I perceived, standing there with my tape measure in hand, was a distinct sense of unease about her demeanor. Looking back now, that moment marked the initial fissure in our idyllic dream. She offered no handshake. That was the first observation that struck me. Most individuals, when introducing themselves, extend a smile, offer a hand, perhaps extend a neighborly welcome. Carol Peters did none of these things. She advanced up the driveway like a general inspecting her troops, her clipboard clutched to her chest as if it were a sacred artifact. Her sunglasses concealed her eyes, but I could feel their imperious sweep surveying every aspect of our cabin, its shutters, the neatly stacked cedar planks adjacent to the garage, even the decorative flower pots Sarah had just artfully arranged. Finally, she halted directly in front of me. "I am Carol Peters," she announced, her chin tilted upward, "president of the Silver Lake Community Association." President? The word hung in the air for a moment, carrying a weight it scarcely deserved. "Well, I'm Frank," I replied, extending my hand. "And this is my wife, Sarah. We're new to the area, just getting settled." She remained motionless, offering no smile, not even acknowledging Sarah's presence. Instead, she thrust a substantial binder into my hands. "Here is your welcome packet. It contains the bylaws, architectural guidelines, fee schedule, and community standards. The annual dues are $500, payable by the 1st of next month." I blinked. "Dues?" "Yes," she confirmed, her voice sharp and impatient. "This covers road maintenance, dock upkeep, winter snow plowing, and," she gestured towards the golf cart parked at the edge of our drive, "security patrol, which I personally oversee." I cast a glance at the absurdly decorated cart, its flashing yellow light, its spray-painted panels. "Security patrol?" I inquired cautiously. She nodded with grave solemnity, as if she were recounting military service. "We maintain order here. Otherwise, people begin to believe they can act with impunity, and that is simply unacceptable." Sarah, ever the diplomat, offered a warm smile. "It's very thoughtful of you to stop by, Carol. We actually weren't aware there was an HOA. Our realtor didn't mention it, and nothing surfaced during the closing process." For the first time, Carol's carefully constructed facade faltered, if only for an instant. Her lips thinned. A fleeting shadow crossed her face. Then it vanished, replaced by a slender smile that failed to reach her eyes. "Oh, of course there's an HOA," she stated. "How else would we preserve the integrity of our community? Some realtors neglect their due diligence, but rest assured, I will ensure you are fully apprised." She tapped the binder in my hands. "All the regulations are detailed within. Lawn height, trash receptacle placement, permissible boat usage hours, approved paint colors. It's all quite straightforward. At the rear, you will find the membership agreement. Please sign it, enclose your check, and submit it to me within 30 days. Her tone offered no latitude for negotiation, no room for doubt. She was accustomed to issuing directives and having them promptly obeyed. I managed a polite nod. "We will review it." Carol leaned in slightly, her voice hardening. "Don't merely review it, sign it. It simplifies matters considerably. It prevents misunderstandings." And with that, she turned, marched back to her golf cart, and departed. The diminutive yellow light blinked, a solitary beacon of her perceived authority. Sarah and I remained in silence. The binder felt heavy in my hands. "Well," Sarah finally said, "she certainly seems dedicated." That evening, after Sarah had retired for the night, I spread our accumulated documents across the dining table, closing statements, surveys, property maps. My analytical engineering mind couldn't let it rest. Something about her presentation felt decidedly off, excessively assertive, overly presumptive. I traced the boundaries of our property, then accessed the county tax records online, and there it was, starkly evident. Our parcel, along with 4 others in our vicinity, had been officially platted in 1978. The Silver Lake Community Association however, was not incorporated until 1991. We were indeed close neighbors, but legally, we were not part of their designated development. Carol's jurisdiction effectively ceased at her own property line. She possessed no legitimate claim over our land, no lawful authority concerning our dock, and no right to demand dues or signatures. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze fixed on the binder she had so forcefully pressed into my hands. This was no mere misunderstanding. It was a theatrical production, an elaborate charade of authority, with Carol Peters undoubtedly the principal performer in her own self-produced drama. I had assumed that simply ignoring her would suffice. Following that initial encounter involving the attention-grabbing golf cart and the substantial binder, I resolved not to escalate the situation. Sarah and I resumed our projects, our leisurely porch coffees, and our pleasant evening strolls down to the dock. For a time, life felt blessedly normal again. Then one morning, I discovered an envelope wedged beneath my windshield wiper. It was a crisp, white, official-looking document. My name was meticulously handwritten across the front in bold, precise lettering. Inside I found a form, a formal notice of a violation. Our supposed offense, the presence of unapproved construction materials. I stared at the words, incredulous. The violation specifically cited the neat stack of cedar planks I had piled beside the garage, the very same planks intended for Sarah's planter box. According to bylaw 7.4, all construction endeavors necessitated prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee, a committee, as I would later ascertain, comprised of precisely two individuals, Carol herself and a perpetually nervous retiree named Gerald, who seemed incapable of making direct eye contact. At the foot of the notice was a monetary penalty, $50, and a stern warning. The fine, it stated, would double every 7 days the violation remained unrectified, and beneath that, a handwritten annotation in Carol's sharp, aggressive script. This is your only friendly warning. We adhere strictly to the rules here. A friendly warning. I emitted a laugh, but it was devoid of any humor. We had never signed her rule book. We were not members of her association. Her pronouncements held no sway over us. I chose not to respond. Instead, I simply relocated the planks to the garage, not out of any sense of obligation, but rather to deny her further ammunition. I harbored a faint hope that perhaps she might finally grasp the hint and retreat. I was mistaken. The subsequent envelope arrived 3 days later. This time, the accusation was improper waste receptacle display. In simpler terms, we had placed our trash can at the end of the driveway on Tuesday morning in preparation for Wednesday's collection, precisely what every other household in the county did. According to Carol's decree, trash receptacles were forbidden from being visible from the road for more than 12 hours prior to collection, another $50 fine. I held the notice in my hand, its edges trembling. Not from fear, at least not yet, but from a rising tide of anger, from the dawning realization that this was no longer about adherence to rules. This was about exerting control. Carol simply could not tolerate the notion that our home, our family, existed beyond her sphere of influence. Our polite refusal had not been a rejection of her HOA. It had been a direct repudiation of her G, and she was not prepared to forgive such an insult. That evening, I began compiling a dossier, a plain manila folder labeled with a single word, Carol. Within its confines, I meticulously placed every relevant document. Our property survey, the plat map, the county road designation, her absurdly comprehensive binder, my courteous letter declining membership, and the series of violation notices. I dated each page. I logged every interaction. My engineering mindset took over. Document, record, prepare. If she intended to engage in a game, I would be ready. But Carol didn't merely play games. She escalated. Her golf cart began appearing with increasing frequency, often parked directly opposite our driveway, its engine idling, the yellow light intermittently flashing. On occasion, she would simply sit there, sunglasses in place, clipboard resting in her lap, observing. If I was engaged in raking leaves, she would watch. If I was sanding the dock, she would watch. If Sarah and I attempted to enjoy a glass of wine on the porch at sunset, she would watch. This was not neighborly oversight, it was blatant surveillance. Sarah attempted a gesture of goodwill. One sweltering afternoon, she recounted, she walked out with 2 glasses of iced tea. "Carol," she said, with her warmest smile, "you must be sweltering out there. I thought you might appreciate a drink." Carol didn't even turn her head. "I am on duty," she stated flatly. "I do not accept beverages while on patrol." Sarah gently placed the glass on the ground beside the cart and retreated indoors, shaking her head in disbelief. 3 hours later, the ice had completely melted, condensation dripping down the side of the glass. Carol finally departed, leaving it behind like a prop in her elaborate performance. The message was unmistakable. There would be no truce. Our idyllic retreat by the lake, the sanctuary we had spent 2 decades striving to find, was being systematically corrupted, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that this was merely the prelude. My 60th birthday should have been an occasion of simple pleasures. The aroma of burgers grilling, old friends reminiscing on the porch, my grandchildren chasing each other across the lawn, a warm summer afternoon with gentle music playing and laughter carried on the breeze across the water. For a few fleeting, golden hours, life felt precisely as we had always envisioned it, joyful, unburdened, and ordinary. Then I heard it. The sputtering roar of Carol's golf cart, its engine strained at full throttle, gravel spitting from beneath its tires. She careened down the road, her yellow light spinning madly, clipboard clutched to her chest like a banner of war. And she didn't stop at the end of the lane. She swerved sharply, completely obstructing our driveway, tires screeching, dust billowing in her wake. 2 of my friends had just arrived, pulling up behind her. She positioned herself directly in front of their vehicle, arms outstretched as if directing traffic in some bizarre impromptu parade. I placed my plate down and strode purposefully down the driveway. "Carol," I said, attempting to maintain a steady tone, "may I be of assistance?" She raised her chin. "You are in violation. Noise levels, excessive vehicles, unauthorized gatherings without prior approval." Her voice was loud enough for everyone on the porch to clearly hear. I glanced back. 20 pairs of eyes were fixed upon us, my guests frozen mid-conversation. "Carol," I reiterated, this time with more firmness. "This is my property, these are my guests, and you are obstructing a public roadway. Please move your cart." "This is not a public roadway," she retorted sharply. "This is community property, maintained through association dues." I nearly scoffed, as I could definitively prove her incorrect with a simple call to the County Public Works Department. But before I could utter a word, one of my friends leaned out his car window. "Ma'am," he said kindly, "we're just trying to park. Is there an issue?" Carol's gaze snapped towards him, her eyes blazing. "I am the problem solver, and you are trespassing. No more than 4 guest vehicles are permitted without written authorization. These are the rules." My patience finally frayed. "Carol, your rules do not apply here. We are not members of your association. Move your vehicle." The silence behind me grew heavy. My guests, my wife, my grandchildren, they were all observing. And Carol reveled in it. It fueled her. It was at that precise moment that Emily descended the driveway. She bore no resemblance to a law enforcement officer. Dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, she walked with an easy grace, a composure I recognized from years of watching her skillfully de-escalate potentially volatile situations. "Hello," she said, her voice friendly, her smile warm. "I'm Emily. Is there a problem here?" Carol appraised her, a sneer contorting her lips. "Another one of you," she muttered, then louder for all to hear. "Yes, there is a problem. This gathering violates multiple community standards, excessive traffic, disruptive noise. These individuals must disperse." Emily tilted her head slightly, her voice retaining its gentle cadence. "And which specific county ordinance are we in violation of, precisely?" The question landed with the impact of a stone dropped into perfectly still water. Carol blinked. "It's not a county ordinance, it's the community bylaws. They are legally binding." Legally binding for members? Emily replied evenly. My parents are not members. She gestured toward me. So, again, what public law grants you the authority to block this road and detain individuals from entering private property? Detain. The word hung in the air, sharp as a newly honed blade. Carol's face contorted. She was unaccustomed to being challenged. Her experience was with retirees who nodded along, too weary to engage in arguments. You think you're so clever, don't you? She hissed. But you're not above the rules. None of you are. She hastily produced her phone, snapped a photograph of Dave's license plate, scribbled furiously on her clipboard, and then stomped back to her golf cart. She moved it just enough to allow the car to inch past, then positioned herself directly across the street, like a silent sentinel, observing the gathering for the remainder of the afternoon. But the damage had been done. The laughter had become subdued. Conversations were stilted. My guests exchanged whispered questions. Is she serious? Can she actually do that? I spent the rest of the evening reassuring them that she possessed no such authority, that they had committed no wrongdoing, but the truth was it unnerved me as well, because Carol was no longer merely issuing notices. She was escalating her actions, and for the first time I began to question the extreme lengths she might be willing to go. As the final vehicle departed, a profound quiet descended upon Sarah and me. The lingering aroma of barbecue from the evening festivities had soured, replaced by an unsettling stillness. Emily, however, remained. She assisted Sarah with tidying the dishes in the kitchen sink, then joined me at the dining room table, where I had spread out the meticulously organized collection of documents related to Carol. A simple manila folder, clearly labeled, contained the fruits of my extensive record-keeping. I had anticipated a light-hearted moment, perhaps a chuckle from my daughter at her father's seemingly obsessive tendencies. Yet, Emily offered no smile. With deliberate slowness, she opened the folder, her gaze scanning the survey maps, property deeds, and official violation notices. A distinct furrow creased her brow as she absorbed Carol's often verbose and peculiar written warnings. "Dad," she stated, her voice carrying an unexpected gravity, "this isn't merely irritating. This constitutes criminal conduct." A weary exhalation escaped me. Criminal? Really, Emily? She's certainly eccentric, I conceded, but surely not a threat. Emily's eyes met mine, devoid of any amusement. "Dad, she obstructed vehicular access. She prevented your guests from reaching your property. That's unlawful confinement, and if she continues to photograph license plates and lodge formal complaints, that's considered harassment, patterned harassment." Her words settled within me like heavy stones. I attempted to dismiss the severity. She's just a cantankerous individual with an electric cart. Emily leaned forward, her expression serious. Individuals with such power complexes rarely cease their actions voluntarily. They tend to escalate. And this particular individual? She tapped the violation notice with a finger. She genuinely believes she embodies the law itself. That's a dangerous delusion. Her tone held an authority that transcended that of my daughter or the helper clearing dishes. It resonated with the conviction of a seasoned law enforcement officer. I reclined in my chair, studying her features intently. This wasn't a display of dramatic overreaction. It was an assessment delivered with absolute precision. "What course of action do you propose?" I inquired softly. Emily closed the folder, her hand resting firmly on its cover. "Continue meticulously documenting every correspondence, every visit, every utterance. Do not engage her directly. She will inevitably distort your words. Establish a concrete record, a traceable trail of evidence. Should this situation escalate to a legal matter, you will possess the necessary proof." I nodded. That particular strategy, at least, resonated with my ingrained engineering logic. Document everything, build a comprehensive case. "And Dad," she added, "acquire a high-quality camera, preferably mounted. Ensure it covers the driveway and the adjacent road. If she sets foot on your property again, I want irrefutable video evidence." Sarah, who had been observing from the kitchen doorway, folded her arms. The prospect of surveillance within our tranquil haven felt intrusive. Emily turned to her mother with a gentle expression. Mom, I understand it feels like an invasion, but this isn't about spying. It's about safeguarding yourselves. Carol is operating outside the bounds of reason. She has already crossed significant boundaries. The next incident could be far more severe. Sarah sighed, a sound of resignation. All we ever desired was tranquility. I know, Emily replied softly, and you will have it. But first, you must be prudent. I regarded my daughter not merely as my child, nor even as family, but as the capable sheriff she had become. Her demeanor was calm, professional, and utterly assured. Understood, I said. We will proceed as you suggest. The following week, I drove into town and purchased a high-definition security camera system. I installed it myself, carefully calibrating its angle to encompass the entirety of the driveway and a segment of the county road beyond. It felt somewhat incongruous, transforming our modest lakeside cabin into what resembled a miniature observation post. However, once the installation was complete, a subtle sense of relief washed over me. Emily examined the camera during her subsequent visit, offering a nod of approval. Excellent. The coverage is clear. If she attempts anything, we will have her on record. That evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch. The faint glow of the camera's indicator light was visible in the distance. This wasn't the serene sanctuary I had envisioned when we purchased the cabin, but it offered a new layer of security. And deep down, I recognized the truth in Emily's assessment. Carol showed no signs of abating her campaign. She was intensifying her efforts, and I suspected we had yet to witness the full extent of her disruptive nature. The next development arrived in a nondescript brown envelope. The return address identified the sender as the County Zoning and Planning Department. Initially, I presumed it was a routine tax assessment or a reminder regarding property boundaries. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, upon opening the letter, my stomach plummeted. Inside was a formal complaint. Our property had been reported for unpermitted shoreline construction, specifically concerning the dock. The document asserted that our dock was a recent addition, erected without the requisite permits or any form of environmental review. I nearly dropped the paper. Our dock wasn't new. It predated my own existence. My grandfather had constructed it 50 years prior. The structure was grandfathered in, established decades before the current regulations came into effect. Nevertheless, the complaint necessitated a formal defense. I sat at the table, the letter trembling in my hands. "Sarah," I called. She entered from the porch, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Look at this." She read the notice, her lips tightening into a thin line. "Who would do such a thing?" She didn't complete the question. It was unspoken but understood. We both knew the answer. Carol. Her distinctive handwriting adorned the violation slips, a testament to her fixation on rules and her apparent need to penalize us. This bore all the hallmarks of her involvement. For the subsequent 2 days, I meticulously sifted through boxes stored in the attic. I unearthed old invoices from the lumberyard my grandfather had patronized, faded photographs of the dock dating back to the 1970s, and survey maps clearly delineating its presence. My meticulously organized Carol file grew substantially with each passing hour. I composed a comprehensive 10-page response, complete with diagrams, annotations, and copies of pertinent deeds. Every piece of evidence I could procure. The process felt less like defending my home and more akin to mounting a defense in a courtroom. As I submitted the packet at the zoning office, the clerk offered a sympathetic glance. "Mr. Clark," she confided, "I'm not supposed to say this, but we've been receiving numerous similar complaints from Silver Lake recently. They're always submitted anonymously and are typically unsubstantiated." Her implication was clear. Carol wasn't solely targeting me. She had extended her campaign to encompass the entire community. I walked back to my truck, my jaw clenched. It wasn't sufficient for her to loiter in her golf cart outside. It wasn't enough to distribute spurious fines. She was actively employing bureaucratic channels as a weapon, intending to ensnare me in red tape solely to inflict misery. 2 weeks later, the verdict arrived. The complaint was officially dismissed. Our dock was confirmed as legal, duly documented, and protected. A wave of relief washed over me, yet it felt hollow, as Carol had undeniably achieved a partial victory. She had pilfered my time, drained my energy, and shattered my peace, and I knew with certainty that she would not cease her machinations. That evening I contacted Emily. She listened attentively as I recounted the events, her voice steady when she finally responded. "Dad," she stated, "this situation is more serious than you may comprehend. Submitting false reports to a government agency transcends mere harassment. It constitutes an abuse of process. It is, in fact, a criminal offense." Her words hung in the air, sharp and decisive. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the undeniable truth. Carol wasn't merely an inconvenience, she was a dangerous adversary. I walked over to my desk, opened a drawer, and added the official complaint to the Carol file. The folder was now considerably thick, bulging with an accumulation of documents. Each page served as a stark reminder that this woman was prepared to distort truth into falsehoods and weaponize the very laws meant to protect us. Sarah approached from behind, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Frank," she whispered, her voice laced with weariness, "how much longer must we endure this?" I offered no response as I genuinely lacked an answer. What I did understand with absolute clarity was this: Carol was escalating her efforts, and somewhere deep within I sensed an impending storm. The initial Fisher appeared at the local post office. While standing in line, I noticed him. Gerald, the habitually quiet retiree who seemed to perpetually shadow Carol like a silent sentinel. He clutched a stack of envelopes to his chest, his eyes darting furtively, betraying a palpable sense of apprehension. I decided to take a calculated risk. "Good morning, Gerald," I said softly. "Frank Clark, from the corner property." He flinched as if startled in a dark alley. "Oh, hello," he mumbled, his gaze evasive. I lowered my voice. "Listen, I wanted to apologize if my planter box project caused you any inconvenience." A softening occurred in his expression. "It wasn't any trouble for me," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I actually thought it looked rather nice." I was taken aback. Nice? That was a far cry from the narrative Carol had been propagating. Gerald glanced around conspiratorially before leaning closer. "She just makes up the rules as she goes along," he confessed, his voice hushed. "We haven't had a proper vote in over a year. No quorum, no official minutes recorded. She sends out emails and declares things as passed, but they haven't been properly approved." A surge of indignation coursed through me. "So, all those fines, those notices." He sighed, the sound heavy with years of resigned acceptance. "There's supposed to be a process, but she consistently ignores it. I'm on the committee more in name than in practice. She always decides, always her way." Before I could probe further, he shuffled away, his grip on the letters akin to a lifeline. However, the seed of doubt had been firmly planted. Carol's perceived dominion wasn't as unassailable as she presented it. The next indication of cracks in her facade emerged at the hardware store. Tom, the individual who had offered a friendly wave from his canoe during our first week at the lake, recognized me in the lumber aisle. "Hey, Frank," he greeted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Heard you've been having some run-ins." I offered a bitter chuckle. "Is it that obvious?" He shrugged. "Word gets around. Look, I'll tell you this. She's been collecting dues, but last winter the snowplow never showed up. Said she found a cheaper contractor, but when the storm hit, we were snowed in for 3 days. We ended up clearing the road ourselves." My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "And the money?" Tom grimaced. "Who knows? She claims it went to expenses, but the dock is practically rotting. The roads are riddled with potholes. We don't see much benefit for the $500 we pay annually." I drove home, my mind racing. The clandestine confession from Gerald, combined with Tom's understated frustration, began to paint a coherent picture. Carol wasn't acting as a protector of the community. She was systematically exploiting it. That evening, I presented all the gathered information to Emily. She sat at the table, poring over the contents of the folder while I recounted Gerald's revelations and Tom's complaints. Her jaw tightened visibly. "Dad," she stated, her voice firm, "this has escalated beyond simple harassment. This smells strongly of fraud." "Fraud?" I repeated, incredulous. She nodded. "If she's collecting funds for services that have not been rendered, if she's fabricating rules without holding proper votes, that constitutes misrepresentation, and if she's misappropriating dues—" She trailed off, the unspoken implication hanging heavy in the air. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Emily then retrieved her phone, tapped a few times, and her expression shifted to one of concern. "Let me check something." A moment later, she looked up, a grim realization dawning. "Here it is. According to state records, the Silver Lake Community Association's nonprofit status lapsed 18 months ago." I blinked, processing the information. "Lapsed? You mean it's no longer legally recognized?" Emily confirmed, essentially, it doesn't exist. They failed to file their required paperwork and pay their renewal fees. On paper, there is no homeowners association, which means Carol isn't just overstepping her authority, she's operating a phantom corporation. I leaned back, utterly stunned. All those binders, all those fines, all those collected dues, every single one of them was rendered void. "She's been cashing checks," Emily continued, her voice hardening, "under the name of an entity that has ceased to legally exist. That, Dad, is fraud, serious fraud." I rubbed my face, a wry, bitter laugh escaping my lips. "So, all this time, she's been acting as the president of a club that no longer even exists." "Precisely," Emily confirmed, her eyes glinting with resolve. "And she absolutely does not want anyone to discover this fact." For the very first time since this protracted conflict began, I felt a genuine spark of hope ignite within me. Carol's carefully constructed edifice wasn't built on solid rock. It was founded on shifting sand, and the tide was beginning to turn. The night we confirmed the legal dissolution of the Homeowners Association, sleep eluded me. I sat at the kitchen table, the Carol file spread out before me, its contents blanketing the wooden surface like an intricate battlefield map. Sarah had retired for the evening, but Emily remained, her demeanor calm and focused, her fingers drumming a light, rhythmic pattern against a stack of association bylaws. "This is it," she declared at last. "This is how we bring her down." Her voice was steady, not filled with overt hope or vengeful intent, but with an unshakable certainty. I leaned back, feeling the weight of exhaustion. "How?" "In 2 ways," she explained, holding up 2 fingers. "1, civil action. 2, criminal prosecution." She tapped her first finger. "The civil route. You will draft a letter, not solely from yourself, but representing a collective of concerned property owners. Present the facts clearly, the dissolution of the corporate status, the unauthorized collection of dues, the failure to provide promised services. Cite the relevant statutes. Disseminate this communication to every homeowner. Once the community understands the reality in black and white, her manufactured illusion of authority will inevitably collapse." I nodded slowly, the logical structure of the plan appealing to my innate engineering mindset. Facts, evidence, meticulous documentation. "And the criminal aspect?" I inquired. "That," she replied, tapping her second finger, "will largely resolve itself. Carol is in a pattern of escalating behavior. She thrives on confrontation. If you expose her actions, she will undoubtedly lash out. When she does, we will have irrefutable video evidence. This will provide sufficient grounds for charges that will hold up." I sat in thoughtful silence, the comprehensive plan gradually taking shape in my mind, much like a detailed architectural blueprint. I could almost visualize the sequence of events, the falling dominoes, the letter, the ensuing community outrage, the inevitable confrontation, and finally, the arrest. However, Sarah's voice, weary and tinged with concern, drifted from the bedroom. All we ever wanted was peace, and she was right. Our sole desire had been for peace. But I understood that peace is rarely achieved by passively ignoring a bully. Sometimes it can only be attained by confronting them directly. Consequently, I commenced my work. The following morning I drafted the letter. I meticulously crafted its contents, maintaining a professional and objective tone. There were no insults, no expressions of anger, only a presentation of stark, undeniable facts. The non-profit status of the Homeowners Association had lapsed 18 months prior. Any dues collected under its now defunct name were legally invalid. Essential services, such as snow plowing and dock maintenance, had not been provided despite the collection of funds. Enforcement actions, including fines, notices, and threats, were unlawful. I concluded the letter with a formal request: a complete accounting of all collected funds and the immediate scheduling of an emergency meeting to elect a new, legally constituted board of directors. It was not intended as a threat, but rather as an invitation for the community to open their eyes to the truth. As I read the draft aloud to Emily, she offered a nod of approval. Excellent. It's professional. No one can accuse you of being vindictive. You're providing them with the facts and a clear path forward. We spent the afternoon compiling addresses from county tax records. By evening, 39 envelopes were neatly arranged on the table, each stamped and prepared for mailing. Yet, even as I sealed the final envelope, I felt the profound weight of the impending repercussions. Because once those letters reached their intended recipients, Carol would undoubtedly realize her reign was under siege, and she was unlikely to capitulate without a fierce struggle. That night, Emily adjusted the camera's angle, ensuring optimal coverage of our driveway. "She'll come here, Dad," she stated with certainty. "Count on it. And when she does, let her incriminate herself. Do not shout, do not touch her, simply hold your ground and allow the evidence to speak for itself." I looked at her, my daughter, my sheriff. And for the first time, I sensed a definitive shift in momentum. Carol was not beyond reproach. She was cornered. Soon, the entire neighborhood would witness the unvarnished truth. I mailed the letters on a Wednesday afternoon, 39 envelopes, each containing a small, potent charge of dynamite. As I slid them into the blue mailbox slot, a sense of relief washed over me, only to be replaced by a heavier weight, for I knew that once those letters landed in their mailboxes, there would be no turning back. Friday evening marked the emergence of the initial tremors. From the vantage point of my porch, I observed neighbors casually collecting their mail. Couples paused at the end of their driveways, their expressions shifting to frowns as they perused the envelopes. Some opened them on the spot, scanning the contents rapidly, their brows furrowing deeper with each passing line. Others tucked the letters under their arms, retreating indoors, only for curtains to twitch moments later as hushed conversations floated through the screen doors. It was akin to watching a fuse burn, slow, inexorable, and unstoppable. By Saturday morning, an palpable unease permeated the air around the lake. Tom from the hardware store waved at me from across the cove. It was a different kind of wave than before, hesitant yet deliberate. Later that day, I observed him engaged in conversation with another neighbor, their heads bent close together, a letter visible in Tom's hand. Even Gerald, the perpetually jittery Gerald, stood at the post office, his envelope partially extracted from his pocket, his lips moving silently as if rehearsing a sentiment he might one day dare to voice aloud. The community's collective consciousness was stirring, and Carol was acutely aware of it. Late Saturday afternoon, her golf cart began its familiar rounds. This time, however, its pace was more frantic, less a leisurely patrol, and more a zealous crusade. The flashing yellow light seemed to convey an angry urgency, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. She paused at driveways, exchanged clipped, perfunctory words with homeowners, and gestured animatedly with her free hand. From my porch, I couldn't discern the exact words spoken, but the body language was unequivocal. Neighbors leaned back, arms crossed, their usual compliance replaced by a subtle resistance. Carol's meticulously constructed empire was beginning to show visible signs of instability. By Sunday, the pervasive silence had undergone a transformation. It was no longer confined to Sarah and me, nor solely directed at our property. Carol's gaze now swept the entire street. When she parked across the road, I noticed curtains rustling down the street, faces peeking out from behind them. The neighbors were no longer looking at us with pity. They were now regarding her with growing suspicion. The fuse was burning rapidly. Sunday afternoon, the inevitable explosion occurred. I was on the porch, engaged in sanding the arm of an old Adirondack chair, when I heard it, the shrill whine of Carol's golf cart. But this time, it didn't halt across the street. It barreled directly into our yard, its tires gouging the edge of Sarah's meticulously tended flower bed. The cart screeched to an abrupt halt, and Carol leapt out, her face flushed crimson, her fist clenched around a crumpled letter. "You!" she shrieked, jabbing a trembling finger in my direction. "How dare you!" Sarah hurried to the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth, a silent gasp of alarm. From down by the dock, I saw Emily look up, a towel draped casually over her shoulders, her eyes narrowing with a sharp, focused intensity. Carol stormed up the lawn, her voice cracking with a palpable rage. "Lies! All of it, lies! After all I've done for this community, you spread poison against me." I carefully set the sander down, my heart pounding erratically. "Carol," I said, my voice remarkably steady, "you are trespassing. Please step off my property." "Your property?" she shrieked incredulously. "This is my community. I built it. I protect it. And you dare to challenge me?" Her hands trembled, the crumpled letter tightening in her grip. She appeared less like a community leader and more like a cornered animal. "Carol," I repeated, my voice gaining firmness, "the association has been dissolved. You hold no authority here. The residents deserve to know the truth. The finances are being accounted for." She spat. "Expenses, legal fees, insurance. You wouldn't possibly understand." She was unraveling before my eyes, in broad daylight, witnessed by my wife, my daughter. And thanks to the surveillance camera positioned above the driveway, potentially by the entire world. Emily was now walking up the lawn, her approach calm and deliberate. She seemed like nothing more than a concerned daughter, but I recognized the measured cadence of her stride. It was the purposeful movement of someone stepping into a critical situation, prepared to assert control. Carol spun to face her, her eyes wide with a frantic intensity. You're with him. You're all the same. You think you can disregard the rules? Not in my community." "Ma'am," Emily stated evenly, "I believe you should calm yourself." "Don't tell me to calm down," Carol shrieked, her voice breaking with emotion. "You people need to learn a lesson." And then she reached behind her back. For the first time, I noticed a holster and the glint of metal. My blood ran cold. In a single, terrifying, surreal motion, Carol drew a black handgun and leveled it directly at Emily's chest. "Hands up!" she screamed, her eyes wide, her face contorted with unbridled rage. "You are trespassing on private community property. I am placing you under citizen's arrest." The world seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. Sarah let out a sharp gasp. My son-in-law, halfway up from the dock, froze mid-stride. My grandchildren stood motionless, their laughter abruptly stifled in their throats, and Emily didn't flinch. She raised her hands slowly, deliberately, her voice shifting from its polite, casual tone to one of unyielding authority. "Ma'am," she said, her voice like steel, "I am Emily Clark. I am the sheriff of this county. You are committing aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. I am ordering you to lower that firearm immediately." Carol's jaw dropped. Her eyes darted between Emily's steady gaze and the gun clutched in her own trembling hand. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Then she erupted into laughter, a shrill, hysterical sound. "Sheriff? Don't make me laugh. Around here, I'm the sheriff." The words cut through the warm summer air like a venomous curse. And in that precise instant, I knew the bomb had irrevocably detonated. Time stretched, each second elongating into an eternity. Carol's pistol glinted ominously in the sunlight, held steady, yet with a subtle tremor betraying her inner turmoil. She stood 10 feet from my daughter, shouting words that had lost all semblance of logic. She railed about rules, about trespassing, about her perceived kingdom. Emily remained composed, her voice measured, each syllable slicing through the rising chaos with steely precision. "Ma'am," she stated calmly, "you are pointing a firearm at a peace officer. Lower it now." But Carol was no longer listening. She tightened her grip on the weapon, her knuckles turning white. "You don't understand," she hissed, her voice laced with a desperate fury. "This is my road, my lake. I make the law here." From the porch, Sarah emitted a choked sob. I took an involuntary step forward, every instinct screaming to shield my daughter, but Emily shot me a sharp glance, her eyes commanding. "Stay back, Dad," she said firmly, without turning her head. Her words were not merely an instruction, they were a protective shield. My heart hammered against my ribs with a ferocity that threatened to split them. My baby girl, with a gun pointed directly at her chest, stood as resolute as stone. Down by the dock, my grandchildren clung to their father, their eyes wide with a primal fear. The once vibrant summer day, moments before alive with shared joy, had abruptly dissolved into a terrifying ordeal. Then a faint sound began to permeate the air. Sirens, initially a distant wail, grew progressively louder with each passing second. Carol's gaze abruptly shifted towards the approaching noise, a flicker of dread crossing her features. However, she swiftly regained her composure, her demeanor turning defiant. "They won't help you," she sneered. "This is my domain." Emily remained motionless, unfazed. Her voice, now noticeably deeper, adopted a controlled, steely tone. "Ma'am, please listen very carefully. You are mere seconds away from being apprehended for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Lower the firearm." For a fleeting instant, I believed the confrontation was over. Carol's arm quivered, her mouth parted, her breath caught in her chest, but then she let out a shrill, broken laugh. "You're bluffing. You're just a child in swimwear. I am the president. I am the law here." Emily's jaw clenched. She advanced a single step, her bare feet crunching on the gravel, her stance as resolute as if she were wearing sturdy boots on duty. "I am the sheriff," she declared, each syllable measured, sharp, and unyielding. "And if you do not relinquish that weapon immediately, you will face a lifetime in prison." The atmosphere crackled with tension. Each inhalation felt like shards of glass in my throat. The sirens intensified, drawing nearer. Carol's eyes darted frantically between Emily's composed face, the weapon in her own grasp, myself on the porch, and then towards the road where flashing lights now illuminated the surrounding trees. For the first time, her facade wavered. Her hand trembled violently, the gun lowered. I was just," she stammered, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean—" "She was trespassing," Emily stated firmly. "Drop it," Emily commanded, her voice resonating with such authority that even I flinched, and Carol complied. The firearm slipped from her grasp, striking the asphalt with a metallic clang that seemed to echo throughout the entire neighborhood. At that precise moment, 2 sheriff's patrol cars screeched to a halt behind her golf cart, their lights ablaze. Deputies emerged rapidly, their weapons drawn but held at a lower level, their eyes scanning the unfolding scene. They observed the discarded weapon, the woman in the fabricated vest, and the county sheriff standing barefoot, clad only in a towel, radiating an aura of absolute calm. "Sheriff," one of the deputies called out, his voice strained with surprise. "Are you all right?" Emily maintained her unwavering focus on Carol. "I'm fine. Secure the weapon. Apprehend this individual." They acted with swift efficiency. One deputy skillfully nudged the pistol away with his foot, then carefully placed it into an evidence bag. Another approached Carol, who had turned ashen, trembling, her eyes darting about like a cornered animal. "Ma'am, turn around. Hands behind your back," the deputy instructed. Carol's voice trembled. But I'm the president." The deputy remained impassive. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, gently guiding her arms behind her back as the handcuffs clicked shut with a sound of finality that resonated deep within my chest. And just like that, her authority crumbled. Carol Peters, the self-appointed overseer of Silver Lake, The despot who had tormented our peace for months was escorted to the rear of a genuine police cruiser, sobbing, pleading, utterly defeated. Neighbors emerged from their residences, drawn by the commotion. They gathered on their driveways, murmuring amongst themselves, their eyes wide with astonishment as the scene unfolded. The deputies, the flashing lights, the bagged pistol, and my daughter standing tall and composed on the gravel. The illusion was shattered. Carol was no protector. She held no true authority. She was merely a woman adorned in a cheap vest and a novelty badge, undone by her own deluded perceptions. I then looked at Emily, my daughter, my sheriff, and felt my lungs fill with air once more. She met my gaze and offered a subtle nod. For the moment it was over. The night Carol was apprehended, our cove felt noticeably lighter. No longer was a golf cart perpetually parked across the road. No more clipboards, no more shadow cast over every gathering or community project. However, a sense of peace did not immediately descend. The pursuit of justice remained. The county prosecutor wasted no time. With the security footage, the deputy's statements, and Emily herself serving as both victim and authority figure, the case was unassailable. Carol was formally charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, harassment, and impersonating a public servant. When coupled with the evidence provided by Gerald, including emails detailing Carol's fabricated votes and bank records indicating dues deposited into a defunct corporation's account, the district attorney possessed ample grounds for a substantial array of charges. For weeks, our tranquil lakeside community was abuzz with disbelief. Individuals who had previously dismissed her actions with a shrug and a comment like, "That's just Carol," now shook their heads in regret. They recognized their own complicity in enabling her through their dues payments, their silence, and their tacit acceptance of her erratic behavior. At the inaugural legitimate community meeting, now officially organized and held in a rented hall in town, nearly every homeowner was in attendance. They were no longer willing to remain silent. Tom, our neighbor from the hardware store, stepped forward to speak. His voice initially trembled, but soon gained strength. "We allowed one person to dictate terms to us. We failed to question her actions. We did not insist on transparency. That is our failing, but it ends today." The room erupted in enthusiastic applause. That evening, a vote was cast to formally dissolve the existing association and establish a new one, properly incorporated with sensible bylaws. They even drafted what they termed a good neighbor clause, stipulating that prior to any penalties or official notices, a conversation, a handshake, and an opportunity to resolve issues amicably must occur. It represented everything Carol's tenure had lacked: fairness, openness, and neighborliness. Tom was elected president. Gerald, appearing visibly lighter, as if a significant burden had been lifted, agreed to serve as secretary. They extended an invitation to me to assume the role of treasurer, which I politely declined. "I did not purchase this cabin with the intention of sitting on a board," I explained with a smile. "However, I would be more than happy to assist in reviewing contracts or verifying figures if you ever require a second opinion." It was a fitting compromise. As for Carol, her downfall was swift and absolute. She pleaded guilty to felony menacing and fraudulent business practices. She narrowly avoided incarceration due to her advanced age and lack of a prior criminal record. Nevertheless, the sentence was considerable: 5 years of probation, a substantial fine, mandatory counseling, and to my personal satisfaction, a permanent injunction prohibiting her from holding any position on any board or homeowners association within the state. Her reign of control was permanently dismantled. Neighbors who once feared her now deliberately crossed the street to avoid her. Friends ceased their contact. Even her husband Gary seemed to fade into the background, a silent, withdrawn figure crushed beneath the weight of their shared shame. Within a few months, they sold their residence at a financial loss and vanished. The last I heard, they relocated to a county 2 areas over. Their absence is not missed. Life at Silver Lake finally transformed into the idyllic existence Sarah and I had envisioned for so many years. We now enjoy our morning coffee on the porch without the sensation of being observed. We grill on weekends without unwelcome interruptions. The grandchildren laugh and splash at the dock without the apprehension of a makeshift patrol cart appearing. Occasionally, a neighbor will stop by, not with a clipboard, but with a homemade treat or an invitation to a communal gathering. We have, after all, discovered a true sense of community, not through submission to a tyrant, but by dismantling her illusion of power and helping our neighbors construct something genuine in its stead. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evenings, I sit at my desk and retrieve the old Carol file. The folder is substantial, brimming with every notice, every unfounded violation, every complaint. It serves as a record of a conflict I never sought, but one I am proud to have navigated, because the truth is remarkably straightforward. Bullies do not cease their behavior when ignored. They cease when confronted. And Carol Peters learned a harsh lesson. No counterfeit badge, no golf cart, no mere bylaws could withstand the determination of an engineer armed with evidence and a sheriff possessing unwavering resolve. Now, as I watch the sunset paint the sky over Silver Lake, I experience a profound sense of something we fought arduously to attain: peace. A genuine, enduring peace.